Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Graham had always believed he knew his wife. 8 years of marriage seemed to have forged a deep intimacy, the kind of connection where words become unnecessary and glances say it all. He was a history professor at the University of Portland, a methodical and observant man by nature, trained to spot patterns and invisible links that escaped less attentive eyes. Felicity worked as an event manager, a vibrant and social woman who turned ordinary occasions into memorable experiences. They complemented each other, or at least that's what Graham thought as he drove home that Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks before their wedding anniversary. His class had been cancelled due to a heating system issue in the building, and Graham decided to use the unexpected free afternoon to organize some notes at home. He walked in through the front door, greeted by the usual silence of an empty house, but then heard something coming from the upstairs office. A laugh. Felicity's laugh, but different. It was light, genuine, filled with a joy Graham hadn't heard in months, maybe years. He climbed the stairs slowly, making no noise, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. Through the slightly ajar doorway, he saw Felicity sitting in the swivel chair, bare feet propped on the desk, phone pressed to her ear, smiling in a way that made something twist in his stomach. "You always know how to make me laugh like that," she said, her voice soft and intimate. "Seriously, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like, to feel this way." There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end, then she let out another laugh. "Stop it, you're going to make me blush." Graham pushed the door open, letting it creak deliberately. Felicity turned her head with a start, eyes wide for a split second before smoothing her expression into something neutral. "I've got to go," she said quickly into the phone and hung up before Graham could hear a farewell. "Graham. You're home early," she said, forcing a smile as she placed the phone face down on the desk. "Class got cancelled." "Who was that?" Graham asked, keeping his tone casual but watching every micro-expression on her face. "Just a client." "You know how it is, there's always some last-minute crisis with events," Felicity replied, standing up and brushing past him toward the hallway. "I'll make some coffee. Want any?" But Graham didn't move. Something was off. It wasn't just the laugh, or the way she'd hurriedly hung up, or how she avoided his gaze. It was all of it together, a pattern his historian's brain, trained to connect evidence, was starting to recognize. That night, while Felicity slept beside him, Graham lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind restless. At 3 a.m, unable to ignore the feeling any longer, he picked up her phone from the nightstand, his heart pounding. She'd never changed the password, she'd always used their anniversary date. He unlocked it and went straight to the call log. And there it was, repeated dozens of times over the past 3 months, the same unknown number, calls lasting 40 minutes, an hour, even 2 hours. Always in the afternoon, when Graham was at the university. Graham wrote the number down in his own phone and put hers back exactly where it had been. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, after Felicity left for work, he looked up the number online. It didn't take long to find. The number was linked to a business profile on LinkedIn, Vincent Hayes, a business consultant specializing in corporate event management. The photo showed a man in his 40s, confident-looking, with a charming smile. Graham clicked on the profile and started reading. Graduated from the same university as Felicity, same class. Then he opened Felicity's Facebook, something he rarely did, and began scrolling through old photos. He didn't have to go far. There, in albums from 10 years ago, before they'd even met, were pictures of Felicity with Vincent. School dances, graduations, intimate hugs. In the comments of one photo, Felicity's best friend had written, "You two were the perfect couple. First love never fades." Graham felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just an affair. It was her ex-boyfriend, her first love, reappearing in their lives like a ghost from the past reclaiming what he thought was still his. Graham wasn't the kind of man who waited, who collected evidence for weeks or pretended everything was fine while dying inside. He was impulsive when provoked, and in that moment, something inside him simply snapped. He grabbed his car keys, looked up Vincent's business address online, and drove straight there. The office was in a modern building downtown Portland, 13th floor. Graham parked across the street at a cafe with large windows offering a perfect view of the building's entrance, and waited. 2 hours later, Felicity showed up. She parked her car, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, ran a hand through her hair, and walked into the building with the confidence of someone who knew the way well. Graham gripped his coffee cup so tightly he nearly broke it. He waited. 3 hours passed. When Felicity finally came out, she was smiling, adjusting her blouse, her hair slightly tousled. Graham left the cafe, got into his car, and followed her. She drove calmly, unaware of his presence 2 cars behind. When she stopped at a red light on Burnside Street, Graham sped up and parked right beside her, honking. Felicity looked out the window, her face shifting instantly to pure shock. She rolled down the window, trying to appear normal. "Graham? What are you doing here? How's Vincent?" Graham asked, his voice dangerously calm, almost casual. The color drained from Felicity's face. What? I don't understand." "Oh, you do. I came to pick you up so we could go to dinner. Thought it'd be nice to spend some time together before our anniversary," he continued, his sarcasm sharp. "Or would you rather have dinner with him? Vincent Hayes, your high school ex, 13th floor, office 1305. 3 hours is a long time for a work meeting, don't you think?" Felicity opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The light turned green and the cars behind started honking. "Follow me home," Graham said, and sped off. The silence inside their house was deafening. Felicity stood in the living room, hands trembling, while Graham sat on the couch with a calmness that was more frightening than any outburst of anger. "How long?" he asked. "Graham, I can explain." "How long, Felicity?" 3 months, she whispered. "We ran into each other at a networking event. We started talking, reminiscing about old times, and it just happened. I didn't plan it. But it kept happening. Every day. For 3 months. Graham stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. "Are you in love with him?" The silence was answer enough. "I don't know what I feel," Felicity finally said. "He reminds me of who I used to be. Before the responsibilities, the bills, the routine. He makes me feel alive again." "And I make you feel what? Dead?" Graham turned to her, and for the first time, Felicity saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was deep disappointment, the kind that can't be repaired. "You know what hurts me the most? It's not just the betrayal. It's that you chose to relive the past instead of fighting for our present. As if 8 years together meant nothing compared to what you had with him as teenagers." Felicity started to cry. "I'm so sorry. I really am. I can end it with him. We can try again." Graham let out a bitter laugh. "End it with him? Felicity, you don't get it. Us, is already over. But you know what we're going to do? We're still having the anniversary party." Felicity looked at him, confused. "What? The party? Everything's already booked, right? That Italian restaurant you picked. We'll celebrate our 8 years. But I have 2 conditions," Graham crossed his arms. "You'll invite Vincent. And I'll invite his wife." Felicity went pale. "You're crazy. I'm not doing that. Vincent is married, Felicity. To a lawyer named Simone Hayes. They have a 6-year-old daughter. Did you know that when you started seeing him?" Felicity shook her head, tears streaming harder now. "He never mentioned, of course he didn't. Just like you probably never mentioned you're married to me, Graham said. So here's the deal. You invite him, I invite her, and we'll all have a civil conversation about our marriages. Or I expose everything right now, to your family, your friends, your co-workers. You choose. Felicity was cornered and she knew it. Afraid of the immediate fallout from a public exposure, she agreed, her voice weak and defeated. Fine. I'll invite him. Over the next few days, Graham executed his plan with surgical precision. He researched Simone Hayes, found her law office, and sent a formal email requesting a consultation about divorce. On the scheduled day, he arrived at her office and was greeted by an elegant woman in her 40s, dark hair pulled into a neat bun, with sharp, direct eyes. Mr. Graham, nice to meet you. I understand you're seeking guidance regarding a divorce proceeding, she said professionally. Yes, but before that, I need to tell you something important. Something about your husband, Vincent Hayes. Simone frowned. My husband? I don't understand. Graham took a deep breath. He's been having an affair with my wife for 3 months. I have proof. He placed his phone on the table, showing screenshots of the call logs, discrete photos he'd taken of Felicity entering Vincent's building, matching timestamps. Simone stayed silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the images. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled, but Graham could feel the pain beneath it. I suspected it. The excuses, the late nights, the way he obsessively checked his phone. But you always want to believe you're wrong, don't you? I understand completely, Graham said sincerely. And that's why I'm here. I have a proposal. My wife is hosting a wedding anniversary dinner in a week. She'll be inviting Vincent. I'd like you to be my guest. Simone looked at him in surprise, then with a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. You want to confront them publicly? Not publicly. Just the 4 of us. I want them to see the consequences of what they've done. I want them to face the people they've hurt. And yes, I want them to feel at least a fraction of the humiliation they've caused us, Graham explained. Simone thought for a moment. That's unusual. But I understand the feeling. And honestly, I think I deserve to be there. I deserve to look him, and your wife, in the eyes and see their guilt. So you'll come? Simone nodded slowly. I will. And afterward, you come back here and we'll start your divorce process. Professionally this time. Graham extended his hand. Thank you, Simone. She shook it firmly. Thank you for telling me the truth. The week passed in surreal tension. Felicity moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking to Graham, and he could see in her eyes that she had indeed invited Vincent to the dinner. Guilt was etched into every gesture. On the night of the anniversary, Graham dressed carefully, choosing his best gray suit. He arrived at the Italian restaurant first, an elegant, private place Felicity had chosen months earlier, back when she still believed they had something worth celebrating. The manager led him to a secluded table in the back, an area with velvet curtains offering privacy. Graham ordered a bottle of wine and waited. Felicity arrived minutes later, visibly nervous, the blue dress Graham had always loved now seeming out of place in this context. She sat down without a word, avoiding his gaze. Then Vincent appeared at the entrance of the private room, tall, handsome, far too confident for someone about to have the worst night of his life. Graham, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, Vincent said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Graham shook it with measured firmness. The pleasure's all mine, Vincent. Felicity's told me so much about you. The irony wasn't lost, and Felicity shrank in her seat. Actually, she hasn't stopped talking about you since you reconnected. 3 months of very intense conversations. Vincent blinked, his confidence faltering. Well, we're old friends. Of course. Old friends who spend 3 hours together in a private office, Graham said calmly, picking up his wine glass. But anyway, we're still waiting for one more person. Someone else? Felicity asked, her voice trembling. At that moment, Simone walked into the room. She looked impeccable in a simple but elegant black dress, her hair loose over her shoulders, commanding attention with her presence. Vincent's eyes widened in recognition and dread. Simone? What are you doing here? Celebrating, apparently, Simone replied coolly, walking toward the table. Graham stood and pulled out a chair for her, gesturing like the perfect host. Felicity, Vincent, this is Simone Hayes. Vincent's wife. Simone, these are Felicity, my wife, and her husband, whom you already know. The silence that followed was almost physical. Felicity was pale, Vincent looked like he wanted to vanish, and Simone maintained an impressive composure. Graham sat down, raised his glass, and made a toast. To 8 years of marriage. To secrets revealed. To lies uncovered. And to unexpected new connections. Cheers. He took a sip while no one else moved. You're insane, Vincent finally said, his voice low and tense. You set this up. Why? To humiliate us? Humiliate? No, Vincent. You two did that perfectly on your own. I just thought it only fair that everyone involved be present. After all, it's 8 years of marriage between me and Felicity. How many years have you and Simone been married? 12, right? Simone nodded, her eyes locked on her husband. 12 years. And a daughter. Whom you left at home with my mother today, saying you had an important business meeting. Vincent tried to speak, but Graham cut him off. No. Now you'll listen. You've spent 3 months meeting in secret, laughing at your foolish spouses at home, planning a future together as if our lives didn't matter. Felicity brought you to our wedding anniversary dinner, Vincent. That's the level of disrespect we've reached. So I thought it only appropriate that Simone be here too, to see exactly who her husband has been spending his afternoons with instead of building a future for his family. Felicity began to cry silently. Graham, please, stop. Stop what? The truth? Graham looked at her, deep sadness in his eyes. You destroyed 8 years. And you didn't even have the decency to be honest with me. How many times did you say you loved me while planning to meet him the next day? I didn't plan to fall for him again, Felicity sobbed. It just happened. And you, Simone finally spoke, turning to Vincent with deadly calm. How many times did you kiss our daughter goodnight and then stay on the phone talking to her? How many times did you lie straight to my face? Vincent lowered his head, speechless. Dinner continued in tense, surreal silence. Graham and Simone talked to each other about literature, law, travel, completely ignoring Felicity and Vincent, who sat in awkward silence, unable to look at each other or leave. It was a form of psychological torture, forcing them to witness what they could have had, honest conversation, mutual respect, real connection, and realize they'd thrown it all away for a fantasy. When dessert arrived, Graham finally set down his utensils and announced, I have some news. I filed for divorce this morning. Simone will be my lawyer. We're starting the legal process to dissolve our marriage, Felicity. Felicity looked at him in horror. You can't, we can try. There's nothing left to try. You made your choice, Graham said. He then turned to Simone. And you? Simone looked at Vincent. I'm filing for divorce too. And I'll fight for full custody of our daughter, because I don't want her growing up thinking infidelity and lies are acceptable behavior. Simone, wait, Vincent finally found his voice. I made a mistake. It was a phase, a moment of weakness. We can get past this. 3 months isn't a moment, Vincent. It's a daily choice. And you chose her over me every single day for those 3 months, Simone replied, her voice steady despite the tears beginning to form. There's nothing more to discuss. Graham paid the entire bill, a final gesture of control over the situation he'd orchestrated. They left the restaurant in silence, each heading to their own car. Felicity tried to follow Graham, but he simply said, "Don't come home tonight. Stay with your parents, with Vincent, I don't care. But don't come home." She stood in the parking lot, watching him drive away, the weight of consequences finally crushing her. In the months that followed, the divorces proceeded in parallel. Graham and Simone became genuine friends, united by their shared experience of betrayal and their need to rebuild their lives. They met for coffee, then dinners, always talking for hours about everything and nothing. There was an ease between them neither had felt in years, a mutual understanding that needed no explanation. 6 months after their divorces were finalized, during a casual dinner at a small Thai restaurant in Portland, Simone looked at Graham and said, "You know what's ironic? I spent 12 years with Vincent and never felt as understood as I have in our recent conversations with you." Graham smiled. "I was thinking the exact same thing." And so, without grand announcements or cinematic moments, they began dating. There was no rush, no pressure. Both had learned painful lessons about unrealistic expectations and failed communication. They built something new based on radical honesty and genuine respect. Meanwhile, Felicity and Vincent tried to continue the relationship that had caused so much damage. But guilt was a constant poison. Every time they looked at each other, they saw the destruction they'd caused. Vincent lost shared custody of his daughter when Simone presented evidence of the affair in court. Felicity lost friends, her professional reputation after the story spread through Portland's social circles, and the financial security she'd had with Graham. Their romance, which had seemed so intense and real when it was secret, wilted under public scrutiny and everyday reality. Less than a year later, they broke up, each going their separate ways, carrying the weight of the choices they'd made. Graham and Simone, on the other hand, thrived. They married 2 years later in a small, intimate ceremony with a few close friends and Simone's daughter, who had come to trust Graham as a stable father figure. They built a life based on open communication, where no secrets were allowed and every feeling was shared. It wasn't a perfect relationship, but it was real, honest, and that made all the difference. Graham sometimes thought back to that night at the restaurant, the anniversary dinner that should have been a celebration but became a reckoning. He didn't regret it. It had been cruel, maybe, but necessary. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or lawyers. It comes from forcing people to face the truth about who they really are and what they've done. And in that confrontation, Graham hadn't just closed a painful chapter, he'd opened the door to something better, something he never would have found if he hadn't had the courage to act that day, when he saw Felicity leaving her lover's building and decided he wouldn't be complicit in his own humiliation any longer. He had chosen dignity, and in doing so, found not only justice, but a second chance at real love. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.